2 days from now, on Thursday, China's parliament is expected to approve a resolution that will drastically reduce democratic representation in Hong Kong's electoral system and vet any candidates for, quote, patriotism.
This is Hong Kong's current electoral system. The city has a population of about 7.5 million people, but its leader is elected by a committee of 1,200 members. They're from 4 sectors: business, professional, social and political, with 300 members from each. A new sector of 300 members is expected to be added to the committee.
Now, details are still unclear, but Beijing's proposed measures will change the size and composition of Hong Kong's legislature in the electoral committee selecting the chief executive, further in favor of pro-Beijing figures. Keep in mind as well that the committee is set to elect Hong Kong's next leader next year.
Here to share more is the Straits Times' China correspondent Elizabeth Law, who joins us from Beijing. Elizabeth, a Deputy Commissioner of China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Hong Kong, said the proposed changes were needed to, quote, close obvious loopholes and deficiencies in Hong Kong's political system. What is he referring to? What loopholes and deficiencies?
Well, so the whole idea that there are loopholes and that they have to refine the system, this is something that has been repeated often by officials in Beijing, as well as senior officials in Hong Kong, when they were trying to push this forward to propose these changes. So essentially what they feel were loopholes is that there were members of the legislature, which is the Legislative Council, where people were being voted, the voted lawmakers. They felt that some of them were not patriotic in the sense that they wanted to reform parts of Hong Kong. They wanted to have open democracy, universal suffrage, which, and at times, I think a lot of them were alluding to the protests that we saw in 2019, that sort of thing. And they feel like whatever happened was the result of people who were unpatriotic, because to them, loving Hong Kong and loving the motherland, which is Beijing, have to be the exact same thing. And that if you want to love Hong Kong, you have to love China as well. And that you cannot do anything that is against what Beijing wants. So essentially that is what they're saying, that they want to close these sort of loopholes. But just to go back a little bit, I mean, we have seen a lot of reports about what would be changed about the Electoral Commission, but we aren't exactly sure yet, because what is going to be passed later this week, well, it's still being discussed in Chinese Parliament now, is essentially just a proposal for the changes. But exactly what happens, that will need to go back to the Basic Law Committee on the National People's Congress Basic Law Committee, and then it needs to go through the Standing Committee before we even have an idea of what is going to come.
Right. On that note, Liz, a new sector of 300 members is expected to be added to Hong Kong's election committee, taking the total number of seats from 1,200 to 1,500. Who will be these new members, do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, to go back to what I said earlier, basically what has been proposed now is just that there will be changes, which is what was submitted to the National People's Congress last week. But exactly what these changes are going to be, how is the Electoral Committee going to be reconfigured? All of that we still don't know. We have no details yet, because the process now is that after the proposal is being voted on Thursday, then what is likely to happen is that this proposal will now go to the Basic Law Committee of the National People's Congress, where the details will now be worked out. And then the details will be worked out, and then there's supposed to be a period of consultation, and then it will go back to the National People's Congress Standing Committee, which is essentially the lawmaking body of the Chinese Parliament. That then they will pass it. And if we base this on the timeline of the national security law that was being passed last year, I think the earliest that we could have more details about what is actually in this, the exact numbers of the Electoral Commission, the makeup of it. I think the earliest that we would know would be 2 to 3 months' time.
Liz, let's talk about how this will affect Singapore, if there are any implications with China having more control over Hong Kong, if these electoral changes are approved. Will we see international companies or investments moving out of the city and possibly to Singapore?
Well, this has been a theme that a lot have been talking about ever since the protests and the unrest in 2019. People felt that, Beijing was starting to have more control, and really Beijing's reach was starting to creep in Hong Kong. We've seen a lot of reports from various news outlets as well, suggesting that the move was something that was a little bit more subtle. They weren't being very open about it. It was because at the end of the day, both Singapore and Hong Kong play similar yet distinct roles in Asia for multinational corporations. For Hong Kong, it allows people and companies access to the Chinese market, which is still, let's not forget, is still the world's second largest economy. It is a very, very important market in the world. But of course, people do see Singapore as a place where there is more stability. And of course, we do have a fairly well-established financial system as well. So I would say that, and there aren't any hard figures on companies that have made the shift, and it's all a lot of anecdotal evidence. So I would say that is something that I wouldn't be able to give you a definite answer on.
Right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Elizabeth. We've been speaking with our China correspondent, Elizabeth Law.